Okay, our presentation is using goal setting and feedback to increase weekly running distance. My name is Amber Chi. I live in Eva Beach, Hawaii. I've been in the field for about 3 years, and I currently work as a special education teacher in the Alternative Learning Center.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elena Kiki. I currently live in Las Vegas, Nevada. I've been in the field for about 3 years, which I started as an RBT, and I currently work as a BCABA for a private company here in Las Vegas.
Hello, my name is Brandon Kern. I currently live in Sugar City, Idaho. I've been in the field for about 2 years now. I work as a habilitative interventionalist, which is about the equivalent of an RBT.
Hi, my name is Valeria Aparicio Perez. I live in San Diego, California, and I've been in the field for 2 years. I am currently working as a behavior therapist. So, introducing our study replication, we're using the study titled Using Goal Setting and Feedback to Increase Weekly Running Distance. It's based on a study of 5 women ages 18 to 20 years old who participated in the study. The intervention was based on daily and weekly goal setting and feedback, and was tracked by using a NICPUS foreground sensor. We modified our study to walking instead of running to make it simple. Yeah. So the first supporting literature that I read is Walking Sustainability and Health Findings from a study of Walking for Health group. 19 walkers agreed to take part in face-to-face recording interviews about their walking experiences during winter 2014 and 2015. Health factors were individualized, with many health conditions implicated in personal decision to start walking. Some of the motivating factors were taped, and some of them were health, companionship, and exploration. The structure within the walking environment enabled participants to set personal goals, express their agency, make accommodations and adjustments when necessary. The findings from the present study not only confirm the established link between group walks and health, but also indicated that people were setting goals and meeting those goals. Moving on to the next slide. The next supporting literature is physical activity levels in adults and older adults 3 to 4 years after pedometer-based walking interventions. Long-term follow-up on participants from 2 randomized controlled trials in the UK primary care. And this study is based on a long-term follow-up of 2 completed trials, the Pace Up 3-arm support and the Pace Lift 2-arm support. 681 pace up and 225 pace lift. All the adult participants were provided their accelerometry data at 3 or 4 years. Participants were instructed to wear the accelerometer on a belt over a hip for 7 consecutive days, from getting up until going to bed. These findings suggest that adult and older adult participants receiving 12-week pedometer-based walking interventions provided either by post or with nurse support are still doing more physical activity even in 3 and 4 years later. Both groups, Pace Up and Pace Lift, were able to maintain physical activity over the 3 and 4 year period follow-up. Next supporting literature is setting larger session duration goals is associated with greater future physical activity. 225 underactive adults were gathered and randomly placed in 1 or 2 tailored print-based physical activity interventions. A, previously validated print-based program, and B, enhanced intervention from cognitive theory. Interviews were conducted to track participants' goals. Of the 198 participants who completed physical activity assessment at 6 months, 61.6% had met their initial goal for a MBPA. Results of the study indicate that those adults who set larger session duration goals engaged in more weekly MBPA at the follow-up than those who had smaller session duration goals. Moving on to the next one, the increase in physical activity and enjoyment through goal setting at summer camp. This study took place at a university-operated day camp open to the public in a larger western U.S. city. The sample consisted of 88 children campers, and the mean age sample was from 7.8 to 1.6 years, with 46 males and 42 females. After baseline, campers set individual step count goals, walking goals, with counselors recorded their camp on their camp rosters. They also set group goals and camp-wide goals. The results of our study generally support the efficacy of goal-setting program to increase step counts and enjoyment of a physical activity at a summer camp. Individual goals significantly increase step counts.
All right. So now that you were able to be introduced to the study that we are replicating, as well as to some of the literature on the importance of goal setting within setting weekly and daily running and walking goals, we can talk about the purpose of our study. The purpose of this experiment is to use the goal setting and feedback to increase weekly running distance using a pedometer to track daily steps. The goal setting will happen once a week with feedback at the same time as the goal setting. All right. The participants, the setting, and the materials. There were 4 participants that participated in this experiment. 3 women, Amber, Elena, and Valeria, as well as 1 man named Brandon. Each participant does live in different geographical locations throughout the United States. All 4 of the participants live mildly sedentary lives. The setting of the experiment is as follows for each person. Elena is in Las Vegas, Nevada. Brandon is in Sugar City, Idaho. Amber's in Iwa Beach, Hawaii, and Valeria's in San Diego, California. Steps were cumulative for the day and could occur inside or outside, depending on the situation. The measurement and design. Our study was conducted as a changing criterion design when the intervention was in place. The data is going to be taken using a pedometer or a pedometer app and documented using the following data collecting chart. The data collection chart will have the session date, the observer, which were paired up prior to the start of the experiment, Amber with Elena and Brandon with Valeria. The observer and the participant will be listed. The goal steps, under baseline, you'll see an NA for goal steps, and then each criterion will occur subsequently. The actual steps that were given in a day, the steps will start at 0 each day, and steps will continue until you go to sleep at night. And yes, whether the goal was met or no, it was not met per day. The behavioral definition of walking. We set walking as any occurrence where the participant is standing up and moves 1 leg forward while leg 2 is in a stationary position and is followed by leg 2 moving forward while leg 1 is in a stationary position. An example of walking would be strolling, brisk walking, or regular paced walking. A non-example would be running, jumping, or skipping. Our procedure. So we will start, or we did start in baseline. It started in baseline for about 2 weeks, which allowed us to stabilize some of our data for the baseline condition. During this time, the participants were tracking their everyday step value. We weren't doing anything to push us harder. We weren't doing anything to relax during this time. We were trying to give the truest value for our baseline condition. We weren't changing anything from the normal routine. The participants took data for 2 weeks to stabilize it. Steps were counted by a pedometer or a pedometer app. No goals were set for the duration of baseline. We kept goals out of the baseline to keep it to keep our step value in the truest form. Each person was both an interventionist as well as a participant during the baseline. Each interventionist received data from their paired participant after baseline as well as after week 1 of intervention. Our paired participants, again, were Brandon with Valeria and Amber with Elena. All right. As far as our intervention goes, our intervention began with meeting with our paired partner to go over the baseline data. Once we went over the baseline data, we decided what our general study was for baseline, and we set long-term distance goals. Our goal that we set at this point was the goal that we would try to obtain each day to ultimately add up at the end of the week. But our focus was on our daily goal for our intervention. After our first week, the participant would meet with their paired partner to go over results. If the goal was not met for the first week, participants were allowed to keep the goal the same or slightly lower the goal. If the goal was met, there should have been an increase in the next criterion goal steps per day for the following week. Data was then taken for the second week to reach a new criterion or continue with the same criterion goal. At the point that we also met in for checkups, we talked about what was working, what wasn't working, what we would like our step count to be, days that were harder. I know we had some of our participants were sick or had family emergencies. We definitely saw a drastic decrease in those days for steps counted. Moving on, we have inter-observer agreement. The equation that we used for inter-observer agreement was the number of intervals agreed upon over total intervals times 100, which will give us the IOA percentage. We had an IOA percentage of 100%. However, we would like to address that in our limitation section of our PowerPoint. Moving on to treatment integrity, we were able to measure the treatment integrity by a yes or no checklist throughout the experiment to ensure the treatment integrity was maintained. I believe also our weekly checks helped us maintain treatment integrity as well, knowing that you were reporting to someone instead of just reporting to yourself. Our questionnaire was as followed. Step 1, we wanted to track baseline with no intervention in place. We were able to do that for 2 weeks for each participant. Step 2 was setting a goal for the participant for the week. We broke this goal into daily goals. So I believe everyone started at 2.5 miles for a daily goal per day for the week. We were able to do that. Step 3 was to track the number of steps for the participant for that day. We were able to do that using the data graphing chart from a previous slide. Step 4 was recording the data in the data collection sheet when the session was over. We were all able to do that, and I believe we all stayed very much on track with keeping our data the day that the data was over and not backtracking on that. Step 5 was record whether the participant met their goal or not. We did this individually, but then we met with our partner to ensure that we were being honest with ourselves and with our treatment team to see if we were able to meet these goals each day as well as throughout the week.
All right, now on to the results. I'm going to start with baseline for each participant, starting with Elena. Baseline was taken over the course of 14 days. The lowest step day for Elena was on February 17th with 1,170 steps. The highest step day for Elena was on February 24th with 7,554 steps. Her average over the 14 days was 3,571 steps. Moving on to Brandon is our next person. Brandon's baseline data was taken over 14 days as well. His lowest step day was on February 17th with 996 steps. His highest step day was on February 21st with 4,582 steps. His average over the 14 days was 2,860 steps. Next, we have Amber. Her baseline was taken over the course of 14 days. Her lowest step day was on February 11th, which was 2,830 steps. Her highest step day was on February 16th of 9,889 steps. And her average over the 14 days was 6,071 steps. And then next, we have Valeria. And her baseline data was taken over the course of 10 days. So her lowest step day was on February 12th, which was 2,748 steps. Her highest step day was on February 15th of 5,327 steps. Then her average for the 10 days was 4,091 steps. So then back to Elena, going over her baseline data with her average being 3,571, her and Amber decided that her criterion would be 5,500 steps for the week. It can be seen that she made the goal 2 out of 7 days. Her range for criterion 1 was 331 steps. It ranged from 331 steps to 7,239 steps. So her average for the week was 3,374 steps daily. Since she only made the goal for 2 out of the 7 days, they decided that they would lower her criterion down to 5,000 steps per day. So for this goal, she met 3 out of the 7 days. Her daily step range was 876 steps up to 8,601 steps. Her average for those 7 days was 4,275 steps per day. So looking at her graph, you can see her baseline data where the arrow points to her lowest day in baseline. Then looking over at her criterion data, you can see where her goal was at 5,500 and 2 of her data points are above the line where the other data points are below. So for criterion 2, we lowered the criterion level to 5,000 and 3 data points are above the line because she made her goal for 3 out of the 7 days. So next we have Brandon, who his criterion was set for 4,980 steps. He met his goal 4 out of the 7 days. His range for the 7 days was 4,183 steps to 5,777 steps. His average for that week was 4,980 steps per day. For criterion 2, since he met his goal for 4 out of the 7 days, they decided to bump his criterion up to 5,577 steps. He was able to meet this goal 5 out of the 7 days. His range for his daily steps was 4,980 to 7,171 steps per day. His average was 5,919 steps per day. So looking at his data in baseline, you can see the arrow points to his lowest walking step for baseline. If you move over to criterion 1, you can see that his baseline was set at the 4,980 mark, and 4 of his data points are above the criterion line. For criterion 2, you see the line has been shifted upwards to make his goal of 5,777, and 5 of his data points are above that line, making his goal. Next, we have Amber. And, sorry, her criterion was set for 5,500 after the baseline was set. She succeeded her goal in all 7 days. Her range for the 7 days was 6,383 steps to 9,884 steps. Her average per day was 6,071 steps. So after meeting with her partner, they decided to bump up her criterion to 6,800 steps. She was able to meet her goal 6 out of the 7 days. Her range for criterion 2 was 6,733 steps to 9,664 steps. Her average was 7,299 steps per day. Her graph shows that her lowest, the arrow points to the lowest walking step in her baseline. For criterion 1, her criterion line is set at 5,500 with all of her data points above the line. For criterion 2, One of her data points is right on the line because she didn't make that goal, but all the other data points are line of 6,800. And next we have the data for Valeria. So her criterion goal was for 5,000 steps. Data was taken for 5 of those days. She was able to meet this goal 3 out of the 5 days. Her range was 4,003 steps to 7,133 steps. Her average for the week was 5,331 steps per day. Since she met criteria for most of the days, she was able to bump up her criterion to 6,000 steps. She was able to successfully meet her goal for all 3 of the days that she collected data. Her range was 7,153 to 7,864 steps, with her average being 7,335 steps per day. Then looking at her graph, you can see the arrows pointed to her lowest step day in baseline. Then you see in criterion 1, her line for her base for criterion 1 is set with 3 of the 5 days above the line. And then in criterion 2, seeing that she met her goal all 3 days with all 3 points above the line.
So for our conclusion, we found that many limitations did impact the outcome of this replication, though despite that, 3 out of 4 did meet their goals for both criterion. One of the 3 that met their goal was not able to walk the same number of days for each criterion as the other participants, so this could have affected the outcome of that person's data if they had walked all those days. In the data, each participant that met their goal showed an increase in the amount of activity during the weekends. One participant that did not meet their goal mostly showed a decrease during the weekend. This was in part due to sickness. Even with many limitations of this study, it did produce similar results to that of the original study. Amongst all the participants as a whole, was in baseline, the average was 4,152 steps were taken. In the first criterion, the average of 5,175 steps were taken. In the second criterion, an average of 6,070 steps were taken, and an increase in each. As we see, there was an increase in each step in each phase. And so this shows that we were able to successfully replicate this study and show that despite the limitations that we had, that we were able to come up with the same results as the original. The limitations of this study. As I said, there were quite a few limitations for our replication. Each person had to be a participant and a researcher. Each of us took data and participated. This being the case, data could be influenced by us by taking and recording the data. Another difference is that in the original study, they had to use Nike equipment to measure and record the data. We did not have access to the Nike equipment and app that they had, so each of us either used a pedometer or their iPhone, an app on their iPhone. Each of our devices were not necessarily tested for accuracy. That was one thing in the original study, that each of their devices were tested for accuracy to tell whether or not how close they were to a mile. So this could have affected based on our height difference, based on the accuracy of each app we used or pedometer. So this could affect our data on several different means because of the fact that they were not tested. Another limitation was that each of us are in different states and time zones. This made contact a little bit more difficult since some of us, in Hawaii versus Idaho and these other places, the time difference was quite large. So this made it a little bit more difficult to report our times to each other because our days ended at different times. This also affected our IOA, because in our original IOA, we would have been able to be there while they were taking steps and be able to see the actual pedometer or the actual app. But since we're not able to be in person because of that, our IOA, the way it was recorded, is we sent our information to each other electronically and recorded that. And that's why we stated earlier that our IOA was 100%, because as we sent that data back and forth, it wound up being the same data. So for this replication, there was also no screening done on participants. And since we were both the researcher and the participant, this means that the outcome of the replication had little external validity. Since we were the only participants in there really wasn't a control for what type of participants, how active we were. From the original study, it was each participant was very active, and with each of us, that was not taken into consideration, our level of activity. As well as with our participants, there were 3 girls and 1 male. And so because of this, there wasn't an equal ratio or balance, since we weren't able to use randomization with that. In the baseline, there was also, only 2 were really able to reach a very stable baseline. We still were able to continue on because their baseline was enough of stable, but it would have been better if we could have continued on with that. The study that we're replicating also really didn't include all the information that we needed for an exact replication. In the baseline procedure in the original study, it said that that baseline data was taken from 2 to 4 weeks, but no explanation was really given for the difference of duration, whether it was did they only go 2 weeks because their data wasn't stable or not. This was also limited by, since we're doing this as a school project, we were only able to record baseline for so long in order to be able to get to our intervention. Another limitation was that one of our participants was not able to meet the same number of days for each criterion as each other participant. The data for this person could have been much different if all the days were taken data on. This being the case, especially for the second intervention or second criterion, when we reached there was only 3 days taken on there. The goals were met for those 3 days, but if they had continued on the rest of for the full 7, if they hadn't met all those, that could have changed that outcome. One big limitation was that many of our participants were sick during different stages of replication. This affected especially one of our participants who had a major drop within their data, as during that week they were very, very sick during that criterion, and so you can drastically see that drop in there. And so this might have affected, they might have been able to actually reach their achieved goal if they had not had that level of sickness, as well as other people did report it as well. And you can, as we mentioned before, you can kind of see those drops as well. Say that in a replication, we also chose to walk rather than running in the original study. And so this, even though we were more focused on the intervention itself and seeing if that replication increased, the difference between walking and running could have made a difference within our actual replication itself. So overall, with these limitations, it did pose some different issues for us. But for the most part, since we were able to, as I said in the conclusion, be able to show that we did come up with a lot of the same data, and we're able to show at least 3 out of the 4, even despite sickness, we're able to meet their goals.
I just want to add in, Brandon, really quick also, that the original study that we were attempting to replicate also didn't mention, I know it doesn't seem like a huge deal, but the health of the participants, seeing as it had such a major impact in our data, and you guys can agree or disagree, I feel like that's one thing that I definitely would have liked to see. I would have liked to see in the study, the original study that we were replicating, was the health of the individuals prior to as well as during the intervention.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that was part of the reason why I was mentioning that there are some limitations in the study itself, and since as we're trying to replicate that, we weren't able to see a lot of the minute details that would have helped us with that. Like I said, specifically with how they did, because like I said, they tested for each person to see if they were active, but they didn't specify what type of activity and how to what extent.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
I also want to note, I know we touched base on the different states and time zones, but also weather. I know we could do it inside or outside, but for someone who lives, in Hawaii, they have more opportunities to walk outside for longer periods of times, whereas somebody in Idaho, where it could have been snowing, didn't get that opportunity and might not have the opportunity to go somewhere inside to walk as well.
I agree. I mean, definitely the different environments that we experience in each of our geographical locations definitely have an effect on it, as well as like your willingness to walk outside or inside or go anywhere.
Right.
Yeah. I think another limitation too is that at times, even at work, I had to put my pedometer, my iPhone app away because I could not be carrying it at that time because it could be dangerous or the kid could like throw the phone. That was one of the limitations I had when I was doing the study.
All right, so last of all, we have our references. I see we referenced each of our studies that we went over for our supporting literature, and then we also have our reference of our actual original study that we went over. So we want to thank you all for watching our PowerPoint, and